Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis. Today is 7th November 2025 and here is the list of topics from different newspapers, and we'll be discussing all these topics in a detailed and in-depth manner. And the first topic is universal basic income, and this is the syllabus of General Studies paper 1, that this universal basic income might be important from the General Studies paper 1 and paper 2 point of views. So let's discuss about universal basic income, and we'll start with the context of universal basic income. Now, first thing that we should understand that in India, wealth gap has been widening over a period of time, and in fact India has been facing converging crisis. Automation led to job losses of people. Gig economy has further led to the precarity and climate-driven displacement. So therefore, the wealth gap has been clearly widening, and in fact, the technology has been outpacing the policy, and technology has also been creating new challenges as well. Now, going into this topic, we'll link how technology has been outpacing the policy and why we should introduce universal basic income. We'll be discussing about that as well. Now, first thing, that this universal basic income, so once it was considered as a utopian option. Utopian option is something which cannot be implemented, right? So it is just an idealistic option, but it is not a realistic option. And in the past also, universal basic income was considered as a utopian option. So however, across the world there has been a renewed demand for introducing universal basic income. Now, in fact, the idea of universal basic income, so it offers not just an economic question, but it is a way to restore dignity, stability, citizenship in a rapidly changing society. So what is universal basic income? You might get an idea. Now, irrespective of which class you belong to, every year the government will provide a minimum amount of money to every individual directly to his or her bank account. So therefore, whatever money that the government has been providing you, the money will be used to meet your basic necessities. So this is, in a very simple way, that's what universal basic income actually means. And in fact, there is a renewed demand to provide universal basic income. So it will help address issues like poverty, healthcare, education, so all these aspects. So this is universal basic income. So therefore, in this context, let's analyze what are the different dimensions of universal basic income. So is it feasible to introduce universal basic income in a country like India? Now we'll understand all dimensions: the economic dimension, political dimension, administrative dimension, moral dimension, right? So we'll understand everything, that whether universal basic income is feasible or not in this 21st century. Now let's understand that the economic inequalities have been existing in India, and it is a very well known fact. Now, in fact, some estimates have been revealing that top 10% of India's population, they own around 72 to 73% of total wealth. Top 1% own more than 40% of country's total wealth. So therefore, it has been indicating that very few individuals, they have been earning a huge amount of money in India. Is it clear? So therefore, India's widening wealth inequality, so that has been highlighting the need for a universal basic income for a country like India, because there are several sections of people who are neglected, right? So they are left behind. So therefore, it is important on the part of the government to provide financial assistance in terms of universal basic income, so that those population groups can also be able to meet their basic necessities in life. Now, if we look at the data with respect to the economic inequalities in India, now in fact, the benefits of economic growth in India, so it is true that we have been achieving a decent amount of economic growth every year. But here the problem is that the benefits of economic growth, they are mostly concentrated with the top richest 1%. Now, top richest 1%, they own 40% of country's total wealth. and top 10% control around 77% of the total wealth. Don't you think that it has been highlighting the existing economic inequalities, the wealth inequalities in a country like India? Now, in fact, Joseph Stiglitz, so he is a Nobel laureate. And in fact, he also highlighted that GDP alone cannot measure equity. Now, for any country which has been experiencing the economic inequalities, so it is very important to achieve equity in those respective societies. But GDP alone cannot ensure equity, it cannot ensure sustainability, and it cannot ensure well-being of people. Right? So GDP alone cannot be considered as a measure of economic development. It may be a measure of economic growth, but it is not a measure of economic development, and this is what Joseph Stiglitz has highlighted. Now let's look at India's ranking in the World Happiness Report. Now in World Happiness Report 2023, India ranked 126th. Now say therefore India's rank 126th in World Happiness Report. So what it has been highlighting? So it has been highlighting that there has been a disconnection between the economic growth that we have been achieving, and the benefits of the growth are not distributed to the poorest sections of the society, marginalized sections of the society. They are not actually benefiting from this economic growth. So this is what the World Happiness Report 2023 has been highlighting. Now, because of this backdrop, in this backdrop, there has been a renewed demand to introduce a universal basic income, and this universal basic income ensures that every individual would get at least a basic minimum income, a basic minimum economic support from the government, and that will help the individuals to meet their basic necessities in their life. Right? So overall it will lead to the empowerment of citizens, it will lead to the autonomy and more security as well. Now when I say security, it ensures social security. Now social security is also very important for every citizen, right? So therefore the universal basic income talks about direct and unconditional cash transfers. Now, in fact, universal basic income also bypasses leakages, exclusions. Now, in fact, leakage, exclusions are the major problems that India has been facing when it comes to delivering the benefits of different welfare schemes. But if you introduce universal basic income, then a certain basic amount of money that the government will provide to every beneficiary across the country, irrespective of the class region that he or she belongs to, right? So however, if you look at the universal basic income, you should not just look at universal basic income as a method of redistribution of income. Rather, it also recognizes the unpaid care work performed by the woman. So as of now, in GDP calculation also, the unpaid care work is not calculated. It is not part of it, right? Particularly women used to perform a lot of unpaid care work, but it has not been getting enough recognition. So therefore, the universal basic income will recognize this unpaid care work as well, and it will help sustain the formal economy, yet remains invisible in the national statistics, right? So now let's understand the universality of this universal basic income, because in fact the universal basic income and its universal nature is one of the key strengths. Right? So universal in the sense that irrespective of the community, irrespective of the section that you belong to, everybody would be given a basic minimum income by the government, and that is the basic idea of universal basic income, right? So therefore this universality of universal basic income is the greatest strength, right? So for example, there are traditional welfare programs as well. So as part of this traditional welfare programs, the government will launch different programs, and government will allocate funds for these welfare programs, right? But the problem with these welfare programs is corruption, leakages, This is the main problem in the traditional welfare programs, and we are not able to identify the beneficiaries, the genuine beneficiaries as well. There are ghost beneficiaries, there are diversion of funds, leakages of funds. So because of all these reasons, if you introduce universal basic income and if you give a certain basic minimum income to every individual, that will help individual to achieve the basic minimum things that an individual should achieve to live a dignified life as well, right? So therefore, the universal basic income, it again eliminates stigma, bureaucracy and corruption as well. So the first major advantage of universal basic income, it could eliminate corruption, right? So it could eliminate stigma, bureaucracy. So therefore, it makes a welfare delivery much more efficient and inclusive as well, right? So philosophically speaking, the universal nature of universal basic income, so it transforms the rights based guarantee, not a political favor, because it is not a political favor that the political party or government has been providing to an individual, rather a rights based guarantee that every citizen, every individual would receive from the government. And apart from that, the universal basic income as an idea, and it has a vision of modern welfare state, right? So it aligns with the modern welfare state as well, right? So the universal basic income will also ensure social protection and also make sure that this social protection is streamlined through the universal basic income. And in fact, the unconditional, and it is also resilient to shocks such as automation and climate change, right? So therefore, this universal basic income, it redefines inclusion, making every citizen a rightful stakeholder in country's national development. So let's understand the economic rationale and practical evidence of this universal basic income. So with some examples also, we'll understand the practical evidence and the rationale behind introducing universal basic income in societies like India. Now, in fact, Society for Empowerment of Women, Society for Empowerment of Women Association Seva, right? So it has led a pilot project in the state of Madhya Pradesh. Now, in fact, it has showed that the unconditional cash transfers to women, it has led to progress in nutrition, school attendance, productivity, health care, in all these different domains, right? So these are known as social indicators. So there is a visible progress in all these social indicators, and this is possible because of unconditional cash transfers. This is the first thing. And apart from that, there are number of countries. In those countries, similar trails are also introduced. For example, countries like Finland, Kenya and Iran. So these countries have also experienced improvements in mental health, improvement in food security, economic stability, right? So when these countries have introduced universal basic income and they started transferring a certain basic amount of money directly into the accounts of beneficiaries or all individuals, so that has led to a substantial improvement in number of different indicators, right? So therefore, it clearly disapproves fears that UBI discourages work. There is another fear that if we introduce universal basic income, no individual would go to work. So they will not go to work if we introduce universal basic income. This is the main fear. So however, the examples have been clearly telling us that even if you introduce universal basic income, so this is just a basic minimum income and individual will continue to do their respective work and they will continue to be part of the country's economic growth and economic development. And in fact, with the development of technological advancements, what has been happening is that the existing jobs are being threatened, right? So in fact, According to an estimate, with the automation all across the world, it may threaten 800 million jobs globally by the year 2030. So by the year 2030, around 8 million jobs might face a threat. Now, in fact, in India, specifically in India's case, with automation, the jobs in the informal and semi-skilled workforce, so they might face a higher risk. Now, however, in this context, so those people who have been facing risk of job losses, UBI will provide them a transition buffer. For example, imagine an individual and he lost a job because of automation. And if government introduces universal basic income, and this universal basic income acts as a buffer for the individual for the transition period, and in this transition period the individual might focus on learning new skills. With acquisition of new skills, he might find a new job as well, right? So he lost a job and he learned some skills and he earned a job. So this period is known as transition period, and in this transition period UBI may act as a buffer for the individual. So therefore, if we talk about UBI, we should not just look at UBI as a welfare expense alone. It is not just a welfare expense alone. It is a strategic investment in resilience and human capital, and this is the need of the hour because the technology has been displacing the jobs of millions of people, including several jobs in India as well. Now, in this context, UBI will also help in reconstructing a citizen-state relationship. A new citizen-state relationship might be reconstructed by the universal basic income as well. For example, if we go beyond the regular or traditional economics. Now, in fact, it is being said that UBI have a philosophical and political significance as well, because it challenges India's traditional welfare politics. The traditional welfare politics, for example, government go to elections. So when the government go to elections, they announce freebies. The problem with the freebies are they are not financially viable in nature, right? So they are not financially viable, and it may result in burden on the state exchequer. So the freebies are not financially viable. So in the place of freebies, what if we have a universal basic income where state guarantees a certain minimum income for every individual for 1 year, right? So therefore, a decoupling income security from the political patronage, this UBI empowers citizens to evaluate the government on a systematic outcomes. For example, how government is working on education, how government is working on healthcare, justice, environmental sustainability, rather than just influenced by the freebies announced by the governments. You will not solely be influenced by the freebies announced by the government. Rather, you are systematically analyzing the performance of the governments. So therefore, this actually helps make a shift, make a transition from a consumer as voter to citizenship, which is based on democracy. So this is another major advantage of the universal basic income. You cannot deny this advantage. But however, if we wanted to implement a universal basic income in a country like India, so we might face some challenges, and it is also important for us to understand and discuss those challenges as well. First challenge is we should have adequate amount of fiscal resources. Only then we will be able to transfer a basic minimum amount of income into the bank accounts of every individual. Now, in this context, the biggest challenge is fiscal and logistical challenges that we might face. For example, a modest income of imagine 7,620 rupees for every person per annum. And in fact, this amount is roughly equivalent to the poverty line. So it would cost around 5% of India's GDP. Right? So this much amount to every individual per year, it would cost 5% of India's total GDP. However, Now, in fact, if the government decided to finance the universal basic income, if the government wanted to give a certain minimum basic income to every individual every year, now it actually resulting in financing such schemes through demands tax reform, subsidy rationalization is also important, and phased rollout as well. So we cannot introduce such a schemes in a one single go, because it may be financially not feasible for the government. So a gradual or a phased rollout is also very important, along with tax reforms, subsidy rationalization. Now understand that when government has been providing UBI to every individual, that doesn't mean that the government will not invest in infrastructure. That doesn't mean that the government rolled back from its welfare responsibilities. Government will also take up the welfare responsibilities. Government will also work to enhance or improve education, healthcare, and other social obligations, right? So therefore, the key question here is that, can India afford UPI? So this might not be a key question, but the key question is, can it afford the cost of mass insecurity? If we don't provide universal basic income, it might lead to mass insecurity. So at this point of time, the key question is, India may not be able to afford mass insecurity, and it is important to provide every individual a certain basic minimum income, which is known as universal basic income. Now, in this context, we should plan and introduce universal basic income in a phased manner, and that is very important. Now, in fact, a phased introduction of universal basic income is considered as a pragmatic and a realistic approach. So first, you focus the vulnerable sections. There are some vulnerable sections, for example, women, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, elderly, persons with disabilities. So first you provide universal basic income to the deprived and disadvantaged sections of the society, and gradually you further enhance or increase the coverage of the universal basic income. So already India has achieved a tremendous progress with respect to India's digital infrastructure, because you have Aadhaar, DBT, Chandan, so which is also known as JAM Trinity, right? So therefore, these systems can facilitate seamless delivery of programs all across the country. And apart from that, we are also focused on achieving digital literacy. Pradhan Mantri Digital Saksharata Abhiyan. This is also another very important scheme which focuses on digital literacy and access, eliminating this digital divide, right? So therefore, all these programs aimed at making India empowered digitally, financially. For example, Jan Dhan Yojana as a program has been launched for the purpose of financial inclusion. We already have Aadhaars, like more than 95% of India's population have Aadhaar cards, right? So therefore, it has resulted in the direct benefit transfer, and that may provide conducive conditions for universal basic income rollout on a large scale. But first, we should be realistic. First, we should be pragmatic. So therefore, focus on some vulnerable sections of the society and introduce the UBI for those vulnerable sections of the society, and that's very important. So I hope you have understood the universal basic income demand in a detailed manner. And next important topic is right to vote. And this article has been given in the Hindu newspaper. From the syllabus point of view, it might be important for general studies paper 2. You can also go through the syllabus as well. Now, why it is in use, what government has said, so let's understand this in detail. Now, recently, the central government has submitted an affidavit in the Supreme Court, and in this affidavit, the central government has accepted or told the Supreme Court that right to vote is a statutory right. Now, few things that we should understand: there are fundamental rights, constitutional rights, and statutory rights as well. So these are 3 different rights. However, in the Supreme Court, the center has told that right to vote is a statutory right. So that means right to vote is provided through a law passed by the parliament. However, freedom of voting is a fundamental right which has been recognized under Article 19 Clause 1 and Subclause A. Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A, it deals with freedom of speech and expression. So freedom of voting is part of Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A. However, this clarification from the central government came during a case, and that case has challenged the uncontested elections under the Representation of People Act 1951. This Representation of People Act 1951, it deals with the conduct of elections, declaration of results, corrupt practices, all those things. However, what are these uncontested elections? Now imagine that there is a constituency A. Now in every constituency there are multiple political parties, multiple candidates who contest elections. Now imagine a constituency A, and in this constituency there is a one single candidate who is contesting elections, who is X. Now in this context, there is no other candidate who is contesting elections. The X will be declared as elected in constituency A. So this is uncontested elections. So therefore, this clarification from the center came for the uncontested elections as per the Representation of People Act. Now let's understand center's stand before the Supreme Court in detail. So as we have already understood that right to vote is a statutory right, but freedom of voting is part of Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause A, which is a fundamental right, and this is what the Supreme Court has said. However, a petition has been filed in the Supreme Court, and this petition has been filed by Vidhi Center for Legal Policy and Association for Democratic Reforms. Now why they filed this petition? Because they challenged Section 53 Clause 2 of the Representation of People Act of 1951 and Rule 11 of Conduct of Election Rules 1961. So both Section 53 Clause 2 of the Representation of People Act and Rule 11 of Conduct of Election Rules 1961. So both these mandating that in an uncontested election, so the candidate who is contesting election should be declared as elected without conducting a formal election, because there is no need for the formal election if only one candidate is contesting elections, and the candidate will be declared elected uncontested, right? So therefore, in this context, the contention is, what about NOTA? So NOTA is a none of the above option which has been mandatorily introduced in every Lok Sabha election and state legislative assembly elections, because there might be some people who are not satisfied with even a one single candidate who is contesting the elections, so they might vote for NOTA. So in this context, you cannot unilaterally declare a candidate elected. You should also consider the votes to the NOTA in that constituency as well, and this is the contention in this case. And in fact, the petition argues these provisions deny citizens the chance to exercise none of the above or NOTA in uncontested elections. Now imagine a EVM box, right? So electronic voting machine, and in this electronic voting machine there are no candidates contesting except one single candidate, right? One single candidate and NOTA. So imagine the electorate as well, and this electorate will not go for the election if one candidate is contesting. But the main contention here is, what about NOTA? Because there might be some people who also cast their vote to NOTA if they are not satisfied with this candidate X in constituency A. So therefore, the center's affidavit stated that the right to vote under Section 62 and Representation of People Act is just a statutory right, but freedom of voting, the act of expressing one's own choice, is part of Article 19 Clause 1 and Subclause A, freedom of speech and expression. However, in 2003, People's Union for Civil Liberties versus Union of India judgment, so it has been noted that freedom of voting arises when voter casts his vote, But here in this case, the no voting will take place because there is only one single candidate, and this candidate will be declared uncontested because there is one candidate. So that's what the Supreme Court has held in 2003 People's Union for Civil Liberties versus Union of India judgment. The freedom of voting arises when the voter casts his vote, but not from existence of right to vote itself. This is what the center's stand is on. However, let's understand the debate over the uncontested elections and none of the above options. So section 53 clause 2 of the Representation of People Act, it allows the automatic declaration of winners when the number of candidates are equals to the available seats. For example, a constituency, there is one single seat is available and only one single candidate is contesting elections. So in that case, section 53 clause 2 of the Representation of People Act says that this candidate should be declared elected and there will be no need for any polls, conducting any polls. However, the petitioners have been claiming that it violates freedom of expression, Article 19 clause 1 subclause G, because the voters have the choice to express or cast their votes to NOTA as well. So therefore, it has been denying voters an essential democratic choice. This is what the petitioners have been arguing. However, the center has been arguing that a freedom of voting, it only exists when an individual casts his votes. But in these uncontested elections, actually elections will not take place. If there is only one single candidate in one constituency and who is contesting elections, there will be no need to conduct elections and this candidate will be declared as elected. However, it added that none of the above is not a candidate. So it is not a candidate under section 79 clause B of the Representation of People Act. So therefore, the center has been claiming that it is legally irrelevant in uncontested elections. So therefore, the center has further warned that indecisive elections, so they are being caused by NOTA, they would further disrupt electoral certainty, invalidate the democratic outcomes as well. Now, in fact, the Election Commission of India has also in favor of center's stance with respect to the right to vote and freedom of vote. Right. So, if we talk about the Representation of People Act, as I have already told you that it governs electoral procedures, eligibility, declaration of results, and there is section 53 clause 1 subclause 3. Right. So this talks about the automatic election. Right. So if there is a one single candidate, so in a particular constituency, then there will be no need to conduct polls and the candidate will be declared elected without any elections. This is what 53 clause 1 to clause 3 says. Now, Article 19 clause 1 subclause J, it guarantees freedom of speech and expression, and freedom of voting is also part of Article 19 clause 1 subclause J as per the People's Union for Civil Liberties case 2003. Now, in fact, the NOTA, it has been introduced by the Supreme Court in the year 2013. In the year 2013, the Supreme Court has introduced NOTA. It has enabled voters to reject all candidates but not treated as a contesting candidate. Supreme Court clearly mentioned that NOTA is not a contesting candidate. The Election Commission of India supported the center, making that NOTA a candidate would require legislative amendment, and only 9 uncontested elections have occurred so far from 1951. Right. So I hope you have understood the center's stance and what petitioners have been arguing that and what is the stand of Election Commission of India. Another important article is recently Indian Navy has commissioned INS Ikshak. So we'll understand this, and this has been given in the Indian Express newspaper. From the syllabus point of view, it will be important for General Studies paper 3 and also for prelims as well. It is important. And why it is in use, let's understand this. Now recently, Indian Navy has commissioned the survey vessel class ship called Ikshak, and it has been commissioned at Kochi Naval base. So therefore, it will boost India's hydrographic survey capabilities, and it also shows progress towards self-reliance in developing or building indigenous ship under the Make in India initiative, so that we may not dependent on other countries for the crucial technology. So let's understand the commissioning and key highlights of this ship INS Ikshak. Now, Ikshak ship was officially commissioned into service at Southern Naval Command in Kochi. And in fact, the ceremony was also presided by Admiral Dinesh K. Tripathi, Chief of Naval Staff. So Admiral Dinesh K. Tripathi is Chief of Naval Staff. So Ikshak is the third vessel in the survey vessel class series and first to be based at the Southern Naval Command. And apart from that, the commissioning of INS Ikshak, so it aligns with India's overall commitment to enhance the maritime domain awareness and survey options. So it will help contribute to nation's environmental impact assessment capabilities. And apart from that, INS Ikshak also represents a new step in improving the precision mapping. Remember that it has the hydrographic survey capabilities, so it will help improve the precision mapping and also ensure safe navigation for both commercial and defense maritime operations across India, within Indian Ocean and beyond as well. So it will further strengthen India's net security provider status and blue water navy policies as well. So that's all for today, and thank you so much. Please subscribe our YouTube channel and also like this video, and thank you so much.